Hi, this is JD with Eat My Science, and this is FAQ Friday. I had planned to talk today about why it's harder to lose weight as we get older and whether or not that's even true or if that's just a myth that we accept as true. And that sent me down a rabbit hole thinking about science and what we believe because of the science that we hear, or sometimes in spite of the science that we hear. And then I watched a documentary on Netflix last night about a growing movement that flies directly in the face of accepted science. And I've just been on this rabbit hole of science. So instead of doing why it's harder to lose weight as we get older, I will do that next week. But today I want to talk about science and whether or not we can trust the science that we are given. So I want to give you an idea of how I look at science and where I get my information and my opinions that I write about on the website or talk about in these videos, so that you know where I'm coming from and how I view science. So I consider myself a scientist. I have always been completely intrigued with the human body. And so human biology is where I have spent most of my time, but I also have a lot of experience in other sciences. Of course, human biology, anatomy, pathology, physiology, but also a lot of chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry, physics, and lots of calculus. So I have a very analytical mind. And I am constantly questioning the so-called science that I hear or read on the internet. And I think that we should all do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing to question the things that we hear. Science in general and scientists are taught to have an open mind. When it comes to science, we really don't believe that anything is proven. We have certain laws that just haven't been disproven. So the law of gravity, for instance, every time you drop something, it falls to the ground. It has done that every single time we've tested it. And so we expect that to happen every single time we test it into the future. So we accept that as a law, but we don't consider it proven. It's just not disproven. So as scientists, we keep an open mind. And when we look at theories, we look at all of the evidence to back it up, and some of them are very strong theories, like the Big Bang theory or the theory of relativity. There's a lot of evidence that points to them being true, but it will never be proven. It will only not be disproven. So that being said, I want to bring this back around to nutrition. I started Eat My Science because I felt like there was a lot of misinformation out there about nutrition and diets and our body and how our body responds to food and drink. And I've actually had kind of a tough time in the last couple years, because the more I research, the more I realize that it's not necessarily misinformation, it's just conflicting information. In order to have something that we accept as truth, it needs to be tested over and over and over again. And when it comes to nutrition, that rarely ever happens. There's a few reasons for this. First of all, the FDA is the organization that we have sanctioned for the US government to determine whether something is safe for us to consume or not. The FDA does not perform its own scientific studies. It takes the science that is given to them and makes their recommendations based off of that. So where does the science come from? Most of the time it comes from the food manufacturers. They're the ones who have to prove that it's safe in order for it to get approved by the FDA. So it makes sense that they're the ones that are funding and doing these studies. And rightly so, they should be doing the studies. But you can see where there's a little bit of a bias when it comes to these studies. And I just want to put this out there. I don't believe that food manufacturers or big corporations are malicious. I don't think they're saying, well, this is a bad product, but we're going to put it out anyway. But I do think that there can be some bias where they forget to look at some variables because they don't feel like it's important, but all they need is to have a few studies that prove that it's not harmful. So they're not just looking at how beneficial it's going to be for humans, if they're looking at that at all. What they're looking at is it harmful? Is it something that they can use to increase their bottom line? And this is not a bad thing. That's how our system works. But you have to consider that when you look at these studies. So they can put these studies forth and the FDA can approve something. And if it goes uncontested, then you have a few studies that show it's not harmful. And this is something that we are consuming. If there's say a watchdog group that does their own independent studies and finds conflicting results, then that can start the conversation about whether it's healthy or not. But all we know with these two conflicting groups of study is that neither of them are completely accurate. If you can show one thing and then show a completely different result, then neither of those are right. In order to find out what is right and what variables are playing into those results, you would have to test over and over and over and over again. And that just isn't done when it comes to nutrition. These studies take a lot of money to fund. And a lot of times they're funded by groups that have a vested interest in finding a certain result. So that pretty much means that none of the science that we read about nutrition is accurate or accepted science because it hasn't been tested over and over and over and over again. We have the manufacturers who get things approved, and then we have the groups that fight against it, and whoever's loud enough gets it changed. Is that a great way to run our nutrition in our country? It's not, but it's what we have. So when I go to look at scientific studies to back up a claim that I'm making or to answer a question, I look at the largest body of evidence. I look at what we call meta-analysis. So these are, this is an analysis of all of the applicable studies in a certain area. And usually meta-analysis are very analysis. Meta-analysis is rigorously studied because you have all these studies and you need to know which ones you can include. So they throw out studies that have obvious flaws and include studies that are sound and have the most scientific, I don't want to say sound again, but it's just they're the best studies. They have the least amount of bias and the least amount of variables that are uncontrolled for. So I look at these meta-analysis and I see what the general consensus is. Another reason why studies are so different when it comes to nutrition is because we're studying on animals, notably humans, and I think that human biology and humans are one of the most complex organisms that we study, including the fact that it's connected to this human brain, which is a whole nother monster that we don't even know probably half about yet. So when we do these studies and we have humans or even animals as subjects, there are so many variables that we can't control for. When we test physics, gravity, we can hold a ball out, we can measure the circumference of the ball, we know how high it is, we drop it, we can see how far it bounces. All of these are variables that we can control for and that we can measure. And when it comes to humans, there's just so many variables and things that we can't control for. So the science that we get through nutrition is going to be pretty much conflicting no matter where you look. But I look at the meta-analysis, I look at the whole body of work and see how it fits together. And that's how I come up with the advice that I give to you, the opinions that I form. And I always have an open mind. If you want to show me something to the contrary, I will look at the study and see if it fits my criteria for not having bias and for controlling for variables that they can control for. And I'm giving you my best information. So that is pretty much all I wanted to say today. Like I said, I watched this documentary on Netflix last night, and this whole group of people is ignoring sound science just because it doesn't prove their point. And that, I think, is the wrong way to go about things. So if you have any questions about how I look at science or the scientific method or anything like that, let me know. I'm going to post a video that I found that has a great explanation between laws and theories and how scientists look at the world. I'll post that in the comments. Next week, I'll talk about why it's harder to lose weight as we get older. It turns out it is true. There's science to back it up. And that is all. This is JD from Eat My Science. Eat well, my friends. Your life depends on it.